I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is Currents. Remembering 9/11 with the chaplain for the NYPD.
We pick ourselves up, we get on with our lives, but the wounds are always there.
And a praise in the park on the 9th anniversary of the tragic day.
Every single person who made a cell phone call from the towers that day called to tell somebody, I love you.
Plus, honoring a leader in Brooklyn's Catholic schools and looking to the future of education in the diocese.
Well, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. It was a weekend of reflection and remembrance in New York City. Family members and loved ones of those killed in the September 11th terrorist attacks gathered at Ground Zero Saturday. They observed moments of silence and read all of the names of the 3,000 victims who died there 9 years ago.
Vice President Joe Biden joined Mayor Michael Bloomberg, Governor David Paterson, and other leaders in honoring the dead. Mayor Bloomberg said it's been a slow process, but Lower Manhattan is rising from the ashes.
No other public tragedy has cut our city so deeply. No other place is as filled with our compassion, our love, and our solidarity. It is with the strength of these emotions, as well as the concrete, glass, and steel that is brought in day by day, that we will build on the footprints of the past, the foundation of the future.
Well, 9 years later, the memory of 9/11 is still fresh in the minds of many Americans, maybe none more so than the first responders, many of whom lost colleagues on that tragic day.
And this past weekend, one of the chaplains for the NYPD, Monsignor Robert Romano, led a mass in honor of these brave men and women. They gathered Saturday at Our Lady of Guadalupe Church in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn.
Well, for me personally, it's knowing that people did not forget. And Father Romano is the tip of the spear. Every year he organizes this, and to see all the brass from the PD show up, the hundreds of parishioners that are part of this Mass, it tells my wife and I they didn't forget.
Today was a day of memory where we come together with police families who lost their loved ones to gather to remember 9/11, that fateful day.
A day doesn't go by where we don't think of these boys. We were blessed. I was at the site when we found Joseph, but we never found John. And that's something you just don't get over.
I don't think there can ever be closure for people who have lost a loved one. We pick ourselves up, we get on with our lives, but the wounds are always there. But it's faith that enables people to deal with the wounds.
The magnitude of the event, I think, it just mandates that we never forget. Sure, we want to go on with our lives. We want everybody to go on with their lives. But there are certain things that you should never forget. And Monsignor Romano's special Mass here every year is a very important part of that.
9 years later, we still remember. The families still come for Mass. During the 9/11 experience, from that day till the day that the last piece of metal was taken from the ground, I was there saying Mass every Sunday for the family and for police officers.
After 9/11, my wife and I were camped out at one police plaza, and every morning Father Romano served Mass for us and the other family members, and that continued on up until the day they closed the site.
I think it's fair to say that most people's lives, indeed probably in America, changed as a result of September 11th, not just New York City.
I don't think it's going to be something that the city can just say it's over. It's something that they have to live and celebrate every year to remember.
And later, we'll take you to a much different setting for another look back at 9/11.
But just ahead, we'll have today's headlines, including, is the Islamic Center near Ground Zero necessary? We'll hear what the man at the center of it all has to say. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Coming up later, Catholic young adults gather for praise in the park in Brooklyn, and they also take time out to remember September 11th.
But first, let's turn to the day's headlines. Well, we just showed you how some other New Yorkers marked the anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks over the weekend. Well, 2 blocks from where the World Trade Center once stood, a proposal to build an Islamic community center continues to stir up heated debate. In Manhattan today, the leader of the group planning to build it spoke out about the controversy.
Is there really a need for an Islamic community center in Lower Manhattan? Is it worth all this firestorm? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, is a categorical yes. Why? Because this center will be a place for all faiths to come together as partners, as stakeholders, in mutual respect. It will bring honor to the city of New York, to American Muslims across the country, and to Americans all over the world.
Well, opponents of the center say its location shows insensitivity toward the 3,000 people killed by Islamic extremists 9 years ago. But others, including President Obama and Mayor Michael Bloomberg, have voiced support for the construction, citing the Constitution's guarantee of freedom of religion. Well, a man accused of stabbing a Muslim cab driver in the neck last month will not be leaving jail before his arraignment. A judge in Manhattan denied bail for 21-year-old Michael Enright. Enright is accused of stabbing cabbie Ahmed Sharif on August 24th after he asked Sharif if he was a Muslim. Sharif said yes, and that's when Enright allegedly attacked, shouting, "Consider this a checkpoint." Enright faces charges of attempted murder as a hate crime. The City Council in Connecticut's capital has decided not to include Muslim prayers before its meetings. Some council members recently suggested adding Muslim prayers along with convocations from other religions. Reports say the council decided not to go forward after receiving mostly negative feedback from the public. Connecticut's chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations planned a prayer vigil outside Hartford City Hall in protest, and the group is requesting that an imam be allowed to pray before a meeting that's coming up later on this month.
The Catholic Church in Belgium is setting up a new center for abuse victims after church officials acknowledged priests in the country had abused hundreds of children. In announcing what they call the Center for Investigation, Healing and Reconciliation, leaders said they are committing themselves to giving the maximum support for the victims. One bishop also called on priests who have abused children to turn themselves in to their superiors. Last week, Belgian church leaders said not a single congregation escaped sexual abuse of minors. 13 of the alleged victims committed suicide. Pope Benedict travels to the United Kingdom later this week amid this latest round of controversy over clergy sex abuse. As we hear from Rome Reports, the pontiff is asking the faithful for their prayers ahead of the trip.
Benedict XVI asked Catholics of the whole world not to abandon him during his difficult trip to the United Kingdom.
Chiedo a tutti di accompagnarmi con la preghiera in questo viaggio apostolico. Alla Vergine Maria, grazie.
The Pope will leave this Thursday, 16th of September, and visit Edinburgh, Glasgow, London and Birmingham. He is due to return to Castel Gandolfo on Sunday the 19th. During the Angelus prayer at his summer residence, the Pope remarked on the beatification of a Capuchin friar, Fray Leopoldo de Alpandiere, in Granada, Spain. His example, the Pope said, may help everyone to serve God with a sincere heart.
La vida de este sencillo y austero religioso capuchino es un canto alla umildad y alla confianza in Dios, y un modello luminoso di devozione alla Santissima Virgine Maria.
Fray Leopoldo was born in Spain in 1864. He became a Capuchin friar at the age of 35. From that moment, he dedicated his life to asking alms for his convent, for the missions and for the poor of Granada. In exchange, he always gave 3 Hail Marys. He died in 1956. During the Angelus, the Pope also reflected upon the subject of God's mercy on the basis of the parable of the prodigal son.
Jesus speaks of the rejoicing in heaven which accompanies the return of sinners to the house of the Father. May his words encourage us to trust always in God's merciful love and forgiveness.
The Pope also greeted a group of bishops and other participants who have come from all over the world for an ecumenical gathering organized by the Focolari movement.
The majority of young Catholics in the U.S. are Hispanic. That is the finding of a new study from the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate. The report shows 54% of Catholics born in 1982 or later are Hispanic. Just less than 4 in 10 are white. The numbers show a significant demographic change in the Catholic Church in the U.S. Nearly 3/4 of American Catholics born in 1943 or earlier are white, while just 15% of that generation are of Hispanic origin. And finally, we've all heard of a fundraiser, but what about a friend-raiser? Well, the Brooklyn Diocese's Futures in Education Foundation held a friend-raiser last Friday evening, and it was all to raise money for Catholic schools and to honor a friend of Catholic education.
For over 20 years, Futures in Education, the foundation has raised millions and millions of dollars to keep children who would not have the opportunity to attend our schools if it weren't for people like you. So thank you. Last year, we gave out over $6 million in scholarships to over 6,000 children to get a good Catholic education.
The reason I came to Futures in Education is because Futures in Education and helping a kid get a good quality Catholic education is what solves the problem. In Catholic schools in Brooklyn and Queens, 99% graduate within 4 years and 98% go to college. So, I mean, if that's not more important than anything, I'm not sure what is.
Children who we help come from families whose annual income is less than $29,000, and with tuition averaging $4,000, the need for tuition assistance is very grave.
And knowing that there's aid for them to be able to attend the quality school in their neighborhood may not be the best, but the school always is, and that really protects them and definitely enables them to be a better person and shows them a brighter future.
Dr. Tom Chazuko has really worked for many years with the diocese to preserve the vision of Catholic education in our diocese, to keep our schools strong.
Our country, our church, our Catholic Church, need these young people to be formed. They need them to be well educated. And in order to do that, we must do that together. We touch the future through Futures in Education and all of the people who support it, through your commitment to Catholic education. We have an integral part in the lives of these youngsters and their future.
And the folks over at Futures in Education tell us that they raised more than $7,000 at that fundraiser.
Wow, nice. Well, stay tuned. There's much more currents coming up. When we return, news you can use heading into tomorrow's primary elections.
The first thing they should consider is to go out and vote, believe it or not.
Welcome back. Well, tomorrow is primary day here in New York and in several other states across the country. So what should Catholics consider when voting? What issues are important this particular year? Well, joining me to talk about that and more is John Heyer, the Executive Director of the Catholic Citizens Committee. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on.
Well, we appreciate your time. Now, of course, tomorrow is a very important day for many reasons. First of all, what should Catholics consider? That was the first question that I kind of posed just sort of in general, and I'll pose it to you. What should Catholics consider when voting?
Actually, I'll tell you the truth. Even when we're talking about this, the first thing they should consider is to go out and vote, believe it or not. You know, one of the biggest things, one of the biggest problems with us Catholics, I'm speaking for myself here, is that we often feel a disconnect and we wind up not voting. Or we don't see someone that reflects maybe all of our values, and so we decide to stay home. And so what's happened is we no longer have a voice, and we've seen that through legislation in the state, as well as just, socially within our city, Catholics being ignored. So I definitely would say the first thing to consider is going out and actually voting.
Actually making the effort.
Making the effort and being there and saying, use the power of the vote. Use the power of the vote to be counted amongst everyone else.
Right.
But besides that being said, I would definitely say there are many different issues. As Catholics, one of our biggest concerns are our schools. And so people that are going to be sensitive to the Catholic school system and be supportive of the Catholic school system has always been one of our priorities from the Catholic citizens' perspective, as well as just parish events as far as our, our local youth programs, our sporting programs, as well as when we're talking about ideas on the respect for life and other social issues as well.
So some very important things there. And I mean, this is sort of, this is a big election year in a lot of ways. And people might say, well, there are a lot of, big races that have been making headlines across the country. But I haven't heard so much about maybe what's happening locally and what's happening here in, say, Brooklyn and Queens and in New York City. Because the big elections, I think, probably for New Yorkers are statewide. There's the governor's race that's happening this year. Andrew Cuomo is the only Democratic candidate, I believe, and then you have a primary election on the Republican side. But other than that, people haven't been hearing maybe a lot about local elections, or there's some really big kind of important races to sort of pay attention to and that people need to be knowledgeable about and maybe get educated about before they head out to the polls and do actually vote tomorrow.
There actually is a couple of local key races, and they actually mimic the national trends. And what we've been hearing on the national side is anti-incumbency. Anti-incumbency. And the same thing is happening locally. New candidates are coming out and challenging long-standing elected officials who have been in office, some of them for 12, 14 to almost 30 years without ever even being challenged in a primary. We have congressional people for the first time that have primaries, for the first time ever, actually, as well as state assembly and Senate. And so, yes, there are actually a lot of important races going on, and they're reflecting those national trends of anti-incumbency. No one has been happy with the debacle of New York State and the legislature. We've seen that all play out. And so people that represent us now have to answer for that. However, that doesn't mean that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. Right. And we do have to be educated and make sure that we are making the right decision, not just the anti-incumbent decision, which could also be very dangerous.
Well, and a lot of people, too, I think, don't realize, and this is something that I've learned, I was telling you before we went on here, that I'm actually originally from Georgia. A lot of times here in New York, more than I think anywhere else, that so many races are decided in the primaries. I mean, that a lot of races are that way. So your vote, you may say, well, I'll wait till November to vote. But the votes in these primaries are pretty darn important as well as right here in the city. So
especially in the city. Within the Brooklyn diocese, obviously encompassing Brooklyn and Queens, Queens tends to be a little bit more balanced when it comes to, let's say, Democrat versus Republican in certain areas. But especially Brooklyn, for the most part, is predominantly Democrat. So what happens is that the person who wins the primary essentially wins the general election, and the real battleground is in the primary amongst different Democrats. Now, this isn't true of all areas, Bay Ridge being an exception, for instance, where we actually have a congressional race going on this year with a primary and a general election. The general election actually is going to be between the current Democrat and a Republican primary, whoever wins the Republican. So that's very interesting, happening in Brooklyn. Usually there aren't Republican primaries.
There's a Republican challenger there.
Exactly. So, or a Republican challenger that has credential. So that is going to be happening. And so those are races to look at. So definitely there are state assembly, there are state Senate, as well as congressional races, some of which I've spoken about in Bay Ridge, congressional races throughout Sunset Park, going up through Sunnyside and Queens. Congressional races out actually near Bell Harbor, out near Rego Park. So there are a few congressional races, definitely, as well as state Senate. There's a chance for a state Senate seat in Queens, actually, to go from Democrat to Republican. But first we have to get through the primary and see who's going to do that part.
It's an important, very, very important.
It's very important, and we really have to be engaged. We have to be focused. But again, more importantly, we have to go out and vote. And sometimes we say things aren't related to us locally. We don't know who these people are. Well, we need to find out who these people are. That's our responsibility as Catholic citizens, is to do this type of work and then have a voice.
Well, it is definitely a responsibility. Thank you so much for being here, John. We're just out of time, but we do thank you so much for spending some time with us, and we'll look forward to having you on again, hopefully before the November elections roll around.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, John. We appreciate it. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Just ahead, Saturday in the Park, and an annual tradition for one Brooklyn group.
I can't think of a better way to promote a sense of peace and unity and a sense of community in a time when people are grieving than the Eucharist.
Finally tonight, while a lot of the focus for this weekend's commemoration of 9/11 was in Lower Manhattan, there was also another event here in Brooklyn that marked the anniversary.
It happened during the annual Praise in the Park gathering of the Brooklyn Catholic young adults. It happened in Prospect Park, as you might imagine, on September the 11th.
We're celebrating the Mass, the votive Mass, in times of civil disturbance because of the day that it is of the 9/11. O God of love and mercy, you destroy war. We pray that you banish violence from our midst and that you wipe away our tears. Protect us from all weapons of hatred. Restore to us tranquility and peace. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Brooklyn Catholic Young Adults is a group of 20 and 30-something Catholics, and we're focused on social, service, and spiritual activities. And Praise in the Park is a Mass in Prospect Park, and it's followed by a picnic and barbecue and fellowship. I can't think of a better way to promote a sense of peace and unity and a sense of community in a time when people are grieving than the Eucharist.
We have to forgive. As I see it, forgiveness is a hallmark and a benchmark of Christianity. Forgiveness is not a feeling, it's a decision. You don't have to feel forgiveness in order to forgive. We'll always remember 9/11, but that doesn't preclude forgiveness. It's like you hate the crime, but you love the criminal. You hate the sin, but you love the sinner. And I think that's what Jesus taught us to do. I got goosebumps when I read that literally every single person who made a cell phone call from the towers that day, literally everyone called to tell somebody, I love you. That's why they called. Just to say, I love you. All right? Do we do that now? What happened to that? We were polite to each other. We weren't rude. We were kind. What happened? So the second challenge that I offer, the first is forgiveness. The second challenge I offer, under no circumstances should we go back to normal. Maintain what we had in those days following that horrific event of 9 years ago. I think an event like this, where we gather together and we pray and praise, it helps towards that forgiveness. And sometimes forgiveness is a process. It isn't always able to be instantaneous. Take away my sin, then sings my soul, my Savior God to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art.
And as the Father said there, it's about forgiveness as you kind of try and move on. I think past anything where someone has done you wrong, you try to forgive. And as he said, it's not always an instantaneous thing. And matter of fact, I think probably most of the time it's not. It's a process, and in order to move on from something, and this happened to me, I think it seems like 9/11 was kind of just the other day, you know. Yeah. It doesn't seem at all like 9 years have passed, but that process of forgiveness still goes on.
Right, and as he also reminded us not to go back to normal and continue to love, and of course forgiveness is part of that process of loving your neighbor, and I think that there are a lot of things happening right now in New York City that can appeal to us in more ways than one on that effort. And certainly I think the process of forgiveness is something that may take some time, but the decision to forgive is something that you can do at any particular point in time.
Right. You might not get there. You might not reach that goal immediately, you have to go through the process.
Right, you can make that choice. Well, if you want to find out more about Brooklyn Catholic young adults, just visit our blog. You can head over to currentsny.net and just click on Riding the Wave. That is it for tonight. Tomorrow, one God but two faiths are revealing a timely look at Catholicism and Islam.
All right. Well, in the meantime, remember, we're always online at currentsny.net. You can also check us out over on Facebook. We're also on Twitter. We're all over the World Wide Web, so check us out. Until next time, I'm Matt McClure.
Nice to have you back, Matt, from vacation. And I'm Francesca Maxime. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great night.